All right, welcome to part 2 of crafting a killer pitch deck. Today we're going to talk about the structure of your pitch deck. What are all the different pieces you should have in place? And then we're going to spend a lot of time on the first piece, which is all about understanding your pain point and communicating your pain point to potential investors. All right, let's dive in. So when you're structuring your pitch, in my opinion, it really breaks down to 3 categories. The first one is your pain point, which is what are you solving? What are you doing? Why should I care, right? The next piece of it is your solution. So first is like, what's the pain everybody's feeling? The next is, how are you solving that pain point, right? Your solution. And really, like, the underlying question there is not what you're doing, but why now, right? And then the last piece is why you, which is all about your traction and your strategy, right? So, and then these things are going to vary over time, depending on like what stage your company is in. In the early days, you don't have a lot of traction, probably, right? You might have a management team, you might have a couple early customers, but really you don't have a whole lot to convince investors that what you're doing works yet. And so you're going to spend a lot more time helping investors understand what the pain point is that you're solving and your solution. And then you'll talk about, in the last third of your pitch deck, about like why you and your team are the right people to pull this off. Later on, as you're in more of the growth stage of the company, right? Series A, Series B, Series C, you spend a little bit more time on your solution, or maybe about the same amount of time, and you spend a ton of time talking about the traction and how customers are loving your solution and you're building the team and all of the things that really point to like why you will win and be successful over the long run. And then late stage, right? This is like pre-IPO. You maybe spend a slide, right? Maybe a minute talking about the pain point, because by then people usually understand what it is you do. You spend a little bit more time talking about the product and how you're solving that pain point, and you spend almost all the rest of the time on your traction and your strategy and so forth, to really demonstrate like, hey, yeah, we are a great company. We have effectively achieved the vision that we set out to achieve when we started the company, and we're going to continue to grow and be successful. If we break it down even further, there's a lot of additional pieces that fall underneath this. So you have market pain, you have solution and your vision, you have competition, you have your team, you have your strategy and your traction, you have your forecast, your financial projections, and then the ask of what you're looking for. Today, I want to talk a little bit more about structuring the pain point section of your pitch deck. So in this particular case, I love this quote from Mike Maples. He said, Mike Maples is a seed investor from Floodgate. Floodgate was one of the very first institutional seed investment funds out there and backed some amazing companies like Lyft. Anyways, he's quoted as saying, "We were looking for a pain so big you needed a tourniquet. If you didn't get it, you were going to die," right? That is like a very kind of visceral quote, right? You can immediately start thinking like, wow, this isn't like, taking some vitamins, some vitamin C, when you have a cold. It's like, no, I need painkillers. I need a doctor immediately, or I'm going to die, right? That's the kind of pain that you want to be able to communicate to your investors. To me, like, you want to help your investors, your potential investors, actually feel the pain point that your customers feel. And so oftentimes the way I like to see that done is where they have a story, right? Let me tell you about Joe. Let me tell you about Jane. And they're like the problems that they are dealing with in real time, and telling a story that like creates like emotional buy-in from the investor, where they like, oh wow, like I can understand how that would be an incredibly painful experience, and I would be searching for any sort of solution. Like, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have, right? If you can communicate that and get the investor like emotionally feeling the pain, then it will tee you up really well for the next section where you're going to talk about your solution. I mean, ideally, you create like this like emotional dissonance or pain in the mind of the investor, so that when your solution comes out, it almost creates like this relief for them, right? You get that kind of buy-in. So some other tips: be able to demonstrate that the pain is deep and wide, right? So by deep, I mean the person, would do anything to solve the pain point, right? It's like insulin. If I don't get it, I'm going to die, right? That sort of thing. And then wide, be able to demonstrate that lots of people have this pain point, right? You might want to talk about market later on, but this is also a good place to like tee up that like, hey, here's Joe. He has this problem. It's really painful. He would do anything to solve it. And by the way, there are 10,000 more Joes out there, right? As a way to really tee up kind of the width and breadth of the pain point you're solving. Another helpful thing is explain why it happened. Why does this pain point even exist for people, right? That can oftentimes really help tee things up for another section where you're going to talk about why now, like why our solution is the right solution at the right time. And then lastly, make sure that like the pain point as you lay it out is perfectly lined up with your solution so that your solution becomes the obvious solution. It's like, oh yeah, of course, that's how they would solve it, right? Because sometimes I'll meet with entrepreneurs and they'll lay out like this pain point. I'm like, yeah, it's a big pain point. I can see that. And then they'll get to their solution and they don't always like align. And I'm always kind of like, okay, like, I guess your solution kind of works, but I'm not seeing like the direct parallel. And when that happens, there's like some definite like, dissonance there where it's like, well, I felt some pain, but I don't really feel any relief. And that's not a place you want to be. Like you want to create relief, like emotional relief for that investor. Some pitfalls to avoid: too much jargon. Sometimes I meet with entrepreneurs and like they throw out a ton of jargon and, most VCs like myself, we're kind of arrogant. We don't want to look like we're stupid. So, we don't really know what they're talking about with all the jargon. And so because of that, like we don't get as emotionally attached to it as we could have been if like they didn't use too much jargon. And then, it's just, you just don't end up caring that much, right? So don't use too much jargon. Don't make your VC feel like they're an idiot either. So, kind of dumb it down to our level while still being respectful, if that makes sense. But for me, like I'm usually just like, hey, like explain it to me like I'm 5. Like, I'm not an expert in your space. I feel like I'm bright enough to get up the learning curves quickly, but the easier like you explain it, the faster I'll be able to get like emotionally invested. Sometimes I see entrepreneurs use like way too much data. It's like that old like Stalin quote where he's, death of 1 million people is a statistic, but death of one is a tragedy, that sort of thing. So if you have too much data, it's hard to like get emotionally tied into that. And then like I said, not having a clear connection back to that solution. So here's some examples. Like I said, I really like it when people like describe a scenario, like walk me through what a client or customer's pain really feels like. Combine data with anecdotes, make comparisons, show examples, right? These are some slides that I took that, I think are like pretty good slides that help communicate different things. So like, we were an investor in Instructure, which makes Canvas. If you've gone to, a university over the last few years, there's a good chance that you used Canvas, their learning management software. And when we invested, like you can see this, like this was their pain point slide in the top left. And they're like, look, Blackboard was like using Windows from back in the 90s. And then, we have slightly better competitors with like Moodle and Sakai, but they're like super nerdy. And if you're not like a kind of a nerd and like, building stuff in Linux and stuff, like it's not going to be super helpful. And what we're trying to build is like the Apple experience for LMS. And, you go through this and you're like, even if you're not a student and hadn't used these learning management software tools, you could kind of like appreciate like, oh man, like Blackboard dominates the market and it's like using a product that was built in the 90s because it was, and it hasn't been updated. Like, oh, that just feels like such a painful experience. And then you compare it to like, oh, like fancy, sexy new Apple. Like, yeah, that feels like a better experience and something that I would want, right? And then they've got some quotes in there from customers that are explaining like how good the solution actually is, right? And some pains that they went through. And so anyways, hopefully that gives you some good ideas on how to do it. But again, my favorite is just tell me a story. Tell me a story of somebody that's been feeling a ton of pain. Anyways, hopefully this was a helpful session on understanding how to structure your deck and how to really communicate the pain point that you are solving as a founder in that pitch deck. Stay tuned for some of my other videos on crafting a killer pitch deck. And if you haven't done it already, go back and watch part 1, where I give an overview of the things that really matter, particularly getting into the VC mindset. Thanks.